Hey everyone, it's Alex, and I am back with my video for the Winners and Ceremony review of the 73rd Tony Awards. This is probably one of the earliest times I've ever done a winner video because typically after an awards ceremony is over, I get busy with things in my own life, and it's weeks and sometimes months before I make a video about the winners of an award show and what I think of them. But I've vowed this year to do much better and to get it out as soon as possible. So it's only been a few days instead of a few months, so I think I'm doing pretty good so far. So I'm here to talk about the winners and the ceremony of the 73rd Tony Awards. And unlike shows like the Oscars or the Golden Globes, I can't really talk about whether or not I think the winners are truly deserving because I haven't seen any of the shows, because while I live in the state of New York, I don't live in New York City. In fact, I live probably about 7 or 8 hours, I'd estimate, if I were traveling by car, and maybe a couple less hours by train. I mean, I could take like a flight to New York City from where I live, and it'd be about 45 minutes of a flight, because I have done that before, where I've had to fly to New York City so that I could fly to somewhere else. But anyway, the point is, I can't say whether or not I think these winners are good or bad. They do seem, for the most part, to go in line with what most theater experts were predicting would win, with a few surprises here and there, mainly in like some craft categories, but nothing like truly shocking that made people go, how the hell did that win? So I'm going to talk about the winners, and then I'll talk about the ceremony, and how I thought James Corden did as host, and what were my favorite performances of the musical numbers, as well as my favorite acceptance speeches of the night. So, let's not waste any more time. Here are the winners for the 73rd Tony Awards. Best Costume Design of a Play, Rob Howell, The Ferryman. Best Costume Design of a Musical, Bob Mackie, The Cher Show. Best Lighting Design of a Play, Neil Austin, Inc. Best Lighting Design of a Musical, Bradley King, Hadestown. Best Scenic Design of a Play, Rob Howell, The Ferryman. Best Scenic Design of a Musical, Rachel Hawke, Hadestown. Best Sound Design of a Play, Fitz Patton, Choir Boy. Best Sound Design of a Musical, Nevin Steinberg and Jessica Paz, Hadestown. Best Book of a Musical, Robert Horn, Tootsie. Best Choreography, Sergio Trujillo, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Best Orchestrations, Michael Chorney and Todd Sikafus, Hadestown. Best Original Score, Music and/or Lyrics written for the theater, Hadestown, music and lyrics by Aeneas Mitchell. Best Featured Actor in a Play, Bertie Carvel, Inc. Best Featured Actress in a Play, Celia Keenan Bolger, To Kill a Mockingbird. Best Featured Actor in a Musical, Andre DeShields, Hadestown. Best Featured Actress in a Musical, Ali Stroker, Oklahoma. Best Actor in a Play, Bryan Cranston, Network. Best Actress in a Play, Elaine May, The Waverly Gallery. Best Actor in a Musical, Santino Fontana, Tootsie. Best Actress in a Musical, Stephanie J. Block, The Cher Show. Best Director of a Play, Sam Mendes, The Ferryman. Best Director of a Musical, Rachel Chavkin, Hadestown. Best Revival of a Play, The Boys in the Band. Best Revival of a Musical, Oklahoma. Best Play, The Ferryman, by Jez Butterworth. Best Musical, Hadestown. So those are the winners, and there were actually a couple of notable firsts that happened at the Tonys this year. For instance, in Best Sound Design of a Musical, Jessica Paz for Hadestown, she became the first woman not only to be nominated but win a Sound Design Tony Award. Now, sound design admittedly is one of the newer categories at the Tony Awards, but the fact that it took now for a woman to get nominated, that's pretty sad. But then again, sound design, both in film and theater, like a lot of other industries, is very, very male-dominated, and it's only been in recent years that women have really started to kind of fill the ranks and slowly begin closing the gender gap, although there still needs to be a lot of closing done in all aspects of Broadway and Hollywood, and outside of that as well. And another historic first, and I'll talk more about this in my acceptance speeches, is Ali Stroker, who, for those of you that don't know, she was the first performer in a wheelchair to ever get nominated for a Tony, and now she's the first person in a wheelchair to win a Tony. So congratulations to her for that historic accomplishment. And also with Best Revival of a Play, this was the very first time that the playwright could win this category, because usually revival of a play would go to the producers, because a lot of the time the playwrights who wrote the Best Revival of a Play nominees are usually dead. But Mark Crowley, the writer of The Boys in the Band, he's still alive. He's 83, I think. He's now technically the oldest playwright to win a Tony for the first time. So, and the Tonys created new rules where if the playwright who wrote the play is still alive and the play has never been on Broadway before, then they can be eligible to be nominated, or if the playwright has made substantial changes to the original play, then they can be nominated, which we saw with Harvey Fierstein. Torch Song, he was nominated as part of that revival because he made significant changes from his original play from the 1980s, which was called Torch Song Trilogy, but he cut off a significant portion so that it became just Torch Song. And also Oklahoma finally got to win a top honor Tony, because when it first premiered on Broadway in 1943, the Tonys didn't exist at the time, and it's been nominated for like Best Revival a couple of times that it's been on Broadway in the past, but it's never won until now, which is saying something, because this production of Oklahoma, which some have nicknamed Woklahoma due to the extreme radicalization of how they presented it while still keeping all the original text and songs intact, it's been very divisive, with some people really loving it and some people really hating it, but obviously it had enough support that it managed to pull through with a win. So now I obviously, like I said before, can't say what I personally thought of these winners, but based on reactions I've seen online, many people seem generally happy for the most part. I'm sure some people are upset by some categories, especially if they were a fan of certain shows, but nothing that's going to cause like as much outrage as, say, Green Book winning Best Picture at the Oscars earlier this year. So now about the ceremony itself. Now, unlike the Oscars, the Tonys this year did have a host, one that they've had before, James Corden. Now, when James Corden first hosted the Tonys back in 2016, that was, of course, the year of Hamilton, pretty much sweeping the whole show. And, of course, James Corden also had the difficult task of hosting the show just hours after the horrific massacre at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. And, many people praised him for being very fun and energetic while also being very respectful and somber when he needed to in regards to that tragedy. And following up such a rave turn is very challenging for anyone. And unfortunately this time, his reception by many has been much more mixed. Some really liked his turn this time, others really hated him. I'm kind of in the middle. I thought he was fine, but I didn't think he was as great as he was in 2016. I think his hosting in 2016 was way better, because I think there he had better songs, he had better skits. Like his opening number in the 2016 show was fantastic, and his skit about where do you recognize all these Broadway actors from? They all guest starred on Law and Order. And he showed some of these actors who are from Broadway who've been on Law and Order, some of them multiple times, like Danny Burstein, who's played 6 different characters on Law and Order throughout his career. That was funny. This year, James Corden, his opening number was kind of iffy. I mean, there were some audio issues where you couldn't really hear him or the other singers all that well, and the song was kind of weird. It wasn't really, they had all the shows, but the theme was just about live theater versus binge watching TV, which is interesting, but didn't really feel indicative of Broadway to me. And then his skit that he did later on in the show, where he had the celebrities in the audience air their beef with one another because he said, you're all too nice, there's got to be something you don't like about someone. And he called on these random celebrities like Ben Platt and Darren and Andrew Rannells and Audra McDonald, and they had to name another celebrity that bothered them. And obviously, from the way they were doing it, it was all staged. You know, they're trying to create like a Jerry Springer kind of vibe, but in like a funny way, where it was obviously fake, but they wanted to do it all dramatic. And it was kind of funny, particularly with Laura Linney and Audra McDonald pretending to go at each other, but it just really felt unnecessary. You know, at least, I'll say this, at least it wasn't as bad as Hugh Jackman doing the infamous rap Music Man thing when he hosted the 2014 ceremony, because that was just so bizarre. It was like you weren't even watching the Tonys at all in that one moment. But one thing he did do that was hilarious was he did the parody of the song Michael in the Bathroom from the musical Be More Chill, which of course got hardly any Tony nominations, only for its score, and it didn't perform on the show as a result. But that show's song, Michael in the Bathroom, has become its standout song, and James Corden did a funny parody of that, along with last year's Tony hosts Josh Groban and Sarah Bareilles, with a small cameo from the king of Tony hosts, Neil Patrick Harris. That was just hilarious. So, I mean, but the show still kind of moved along at a nice pace. It didn't really go over long that much. I mean, the Tonys usually don't go on as long as the Oscars or the Emmys. So it wasn't really a bad show per se, but just wasn't the greatest show. You know, it's just average in terms of James Corden's hosting duties. The speeches and performances, though, they were fantastic. With the speeches, with my top 5 ranking, I had some people that were definitely going to be in there, but how I was going to rank them, I wasn't sure. And if there's a person whose name I don't mention, you know, I apologize in advance, but it was hard to narrow it down to just the top 5, and everyone else that I don't mention, they're all technically honorable mentions. Nobody gave a bad speech at all. There was nothing as bad as the dreaded speech given by the makeup and hairstyling team from Vice at the Oscars, because that was easily one of the worst speeches I had ever seen at any award show, just because of how unprepared they were. You know, I mean, they were trying to read names off a piece of paper, and you would think, well, couldn't they have at least discussed beforehand who would mention who? But anyway, back to the Tony speeches. These were my top 5 acceptance speeches. At number 5, I had Santino Fontana, where, given that he was playing a man who dresses up as a woman, he made it a point to thank all the women in his life who made an impact on him, like his grandmother and his wife. Number 4, Rachel Chavkin. You know, she finally got to win a Tony after she shockingly lost in 2017 for Natasha Pierre in The Great Comet of 1812. At first, she was just reading off her speech, and it sounded kind of boring at first, you know, like, oh, come on, put a little more effort into it. But then near the end, she really hit her mark and gave a passionate plea for more inclusion and diversity on Broadway in terms of better representation for women and people of color behind the scenes, because she was the only woman to have directed a musical on Broadway this past season. And while obviously great efforts have been made for diversity in Broadway and Hollywood, there is obviously still much, much more that needs to be done. If anyone says we've come all the way, we haven't, not by a long shot. But speaking of diversity, that goes to my number 3 speech, Ali Stroker. As I mentioned before, she made history as the first person in a wheelchair to ever be nominated for or win a Tony. And when she came out on stage to accept her award, she said, you know, this is for all the kids out there with a disability or a challenge who wanted to see themselves represented. And then she held up her Tony and said, "You are," and that got a huge standing ovation from the audience. And then at number 2, I have Stephanie J. Block. And, you know, she was talking very fast, but she was very emotional. Her speech actually reminded me a lot of Laura Benanti's acceptance speech when she won in 2008 as featured actress in a musical for Gypsy, which in my opinion is still the best Tony speech I have ever seen in my life. But with Stephanie J. Block, she was very emotional, and you felt very moved by her speech in which she thanked everyone from her younger self to her daughter, and of course Cher, who she plays in the Cher show. Well, one of the three Chers, because the show's about Cher at three different stages in her life. And then my number one acceptance speech, and I'm sure a lot of people probably have him as their number one as well, is Andre de Shields. He, of course, is a Broadway legend. He's been in Broadway for 50 years, and he's been in classic musicals like The Wiz and Ain't Misbehavin', and shockingly, he never got Tony nominations for those, believe it or not. This is only his third nomination, his nomination for Hadestown, and he won. And in his speech, he was very proud but very humble, and he thanked his hometown of Baltimore, and he's like, I promised I would make you proud, and I think he definitely has, and he gave his 3 tips of how to live a good life in terms of, and he said, you know, surround yourself with positive people, the slowest journey is always the most rewarding, and then his last one, which was probably the most impactful, the top of one mountain is the bottom of another, keep on climbing. And that got a massive response from the audience, and, you know, good for him. Alright, and then my top 5 performances. Everybody always likes to rank the musical performances, and I include all performances here, not just simply the performances of the nominated shows. If people were singing for other reasons, they're included in my list. So for my top 5 performances, at number 5 I have Kiss Me Kate. Instead of doing like a full like singing number, they just did a dance number with the iconic dance Too Darn Hot. And man, those dancers, I don't think I could ever do a dance like that. And I've done theater myself in high school and had to learn some pretty complex dance routines that I didn't think I could pull off, but I managed to do so. But it would take me probably a year of training to be able to do, at least to be able to do the dancing that those dancers did. Number 4, I have Tootsie. The song they did, I think, was called Unstoppable. I'm bad with the song names for all these new shows. But yeah, they did the song where Michael Dorsey changes into Dorothy Michaels, and that quick change they do on Santino Fontana, I mean, wow. Number 3, I have Oklahoma. They did kind of a medley with first Ali Stroker singing her character Ado Annie's signature song, I Can't Say No, and man, this woman has some amazing vocals. I mean, she sings the song in kind of the Dolly Parton country twang, and it sounds magnificent. And then it went from her to the whole cast singing the titular song of Oklahoma, and you know, in this version they use guitars and banjos and like violins instead of like a traditional Broadway orchestra. One of the many ways in which this version is very different, and they also wear modern clothing instead of, you know, early 20th century clothing. And number 2, I have Hadestown. They did their song Wait For Me. They have these like swinging chandeliers and a turntable on stage, and kind of a steampunk vibe. Almost kind of reminded me of the movie Hugo in a way, because that movie had a steampunk aesthetic to it. And the music that I heard in this number kind of combined traditional Broadway with jazz and folk and rock. Kind of sounded like a typical Broadway score and an atypical Broadway score kind of blended together. And then my number 1 performance was Cynthia Areevo during the In Memoriam segment. My God, this woman can sing. I didn't get to see her on Broadway in The Color Purple, but I saw her sing on the Tony Awards that year, and she brought down the house. And then last year she played a singer in the movie Bad Times at the El Royale. She was the standout of that movie's cast, in my opinion, which wasn't an easy thing to do because that movie's cast contained the likes of Jeff Bridges, Chris Hemsworth, Dakota Johnson, John Hamm, and many others. And she was so good, I honestly wanted her to get an Oscar nomination for that movie, but sadly that never happened. But here she sang Elton John's iconic song, Can You Feel the Love Tonight, from The Lion King, which won him an Oscar. And she honestly gave one of the most powerful, moving renditions of that song I've ever heard in my life. I mean, wow. And that's all I really have to say about this year's Tony Awards. So if you watched the Tonys, let me know in the comment section below what you thought of the show. What did you think of the winners? What were your favorite performances? Who gave the best acceptance speech in your opinion? Let me know in the comment section below. and be sure to subscribe to my channels and click the notification bell so you can get all my new videos as soon as they're uploaded, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!